Some truths are buried for a reason. A young cartographer named Elara is about to risk everything for one of them, a place whispered only in myth, the lost shores of Enmenor. By the end of her story, you will understand the real price of unearthing a forbidden past. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? I always find it wonderful to picture us all connected by this single tale. Elara lives in a society governed by strict elders who have declared the ancient continent a dangerous fantasy. But she possesses a secret, a sea-worn map that suggests the legends are real. Defying their decree could see her exiled forever, cast out from the only home she has ever known. Why would the sea itself refuse to give back an entire continent? And what happens when a single curious heart challenges the foundation of an entire world? What secret from your own world would you dare to uncover, no matter the cost? The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as Elara slipped into the forbidden cove. She moved not by sight in the moonless dark, but by memory, her mind a living chart of the tide's retreat. Her boots sank into the wet sand where no one was permitted to walk, each step a defiance. Then her fingers, brushing away a veil of kelp and shells, found it. Not stone, not wood, but a cool, impossibly smooth shard of metal that the salt water had not touched. It was lighter than it should be, and etched upon its surface was a symbol she knew only from forbidden texts, a star with 7 points. Triumph surged through her, so potent it was dizzying. This was real, the map was real, and Enmenor was real, but the feeling curdled instantly into a cold, sharp fear. She was not alone. The rhythmic tread of the harbor guard echoed from the cliffs above, a reminder that her crime was punishable by exile. Slipping the shard into a hidden pocket, she felt the weight of it change from evidence to contraband. Her duty to the elders and the quiet order of her life warred with a truth that now had physical form. It was a conflict that could no longer be contained within her own heart. She needed an ally, someone who lived more in the world of old words than in the world of new rules. There was only one person she could risk trusting, her cousin Kael, who preferred dusty scrolls to people. The shard seemed to burn against her leg as she fled the cove, a secret that could unravel everything her society believed. Later, in the flickering candlelight of her room, she saw it. The star symbol on the metal was not merely etched. It pulsed with a faint inner light, a soft and steady rhythm like a distant heartbeat. And as she watched, mesmerized, she felt an inexplicable pull, a silent call directing her gaze through her window toward the mist-shrouded peaks where the ancient and mysterious star singers were said to have dwelled. Kael's hands trembled as he traced the glowing star on the shard, his usual academic calm replaced by a raw, focused intensity. "This is no simple decoration," he whispered, his voice tight with awe. "It is a clock, Elara, a celestial marker pointing to a specific alignment of the planets, one the elders scrubbed from our charts generations ago. But to understand its timing, we need someone who remembers the old skies. There is only one man who would know, but finding him is as dangerous as the knowledge he holds. The astronomer Oren lives in exile high in the coastal cliffs, declared a heretic for his belief in Enminor. To reach him, they would have to become fugitives themselves. The journey was a harrowing test of will. They moved only under the cloak of night, avoiding the well-lit patrol routes by scrambling across jagged, unstable rock faces where a single misplaced step meant a fall into the roaring sea below. Every shadow seemed to hold a guard. Every snapped twig sounded like an alarm. Elara's fear was a constant, cold companion, not just for herself, but that she was leading ruin directly to a man who had already lost everything. Oren's refuge was a cave, shielded by a waterfall, its entrance hidden behind a curtain of roaring water. The old man greeted them not with welcome, but with a drawn blade, his eyes burning with a deep and justified suspicion. "You bring the elders trouble to my door," he snarled, his gaze darting past them into the darkness. But then Elara placed the pulsating shard into his calloused hand. The change was immediate. The hostility in his eyes melted into something ancient and sorrowful. He stared at the star, as if greeting an old friend he never thought to see again. "My life's work," he murmured, his voice cracking, condemned as a lie. He led them deeper into the cave, to a wall covered in a complex chart of the heavens, drawn in charcoal and ochre. "Your cousin is correct," Oren said, his finger finding a convergence of orbits on the chart. "The alignment peaks in 3 nights. It is the key. The shard will react to the combined light, but it is only a key. The lock it opens is the tidal lens, a crystal device the star singers forged to see the unseen. It was lost centuries ago, cast into the churning depths of the Serpent's Strait during the Great Purges. To use the alignment, you must first brave the Strait and find what the sea has kept hidden. The Serpent's Strait was a churning mouth of white water and thunder. Their borrowed skiff, little more than a shell of cracking wood and frayed rope, felt like a leaf tossed into a storm. Elara gripped the tiller, her knuckles white, while Kael clung to the bow, shouting star chart coordinates over the roar. He was navigating not by sight of the water, but by the positions of the few stars visible between scudding clouds, timing their desperate dashes between whirlpools that appeared like sudden, hungry voids. The lunar phase was their only shield, a low tide that exposed just enough of the razor-sharp black teeth of rock to give them a sliver of a path. One miscalculation, one wave a moment too soon, and they would be splinters. Then Kael pointed, his voice a raw scream. There, caught in a grotto behind a curtain of falling water, a sphere of pure crystal pulsed with the same soft, rhythmic light as their shard. The tidal lens. Elara drove the skiff toward it, the little vessel groaning in protest as a cross-current slammed into them. The sound of splintering wood was sickening. A fallen spar, torn loose from the rigging, struck Kael's shoulder, and he crumpled to the deck with a sharp cry. In that heart-stopping moment, Elara faced a brutal choice. Her cousin was bleeding, his face twisted in pain, but the lens was right there, its light calling to the shard in her pocket. The mission, the truth of Enmenor, everything they had risked, was within reach. She made the decision in a split second, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She leaped for the grotto, her fingers closing around the smooth, cool crystal. It was heavier than it looked, thrumming with a deep, resonant energy. Hauling it back into the wrecked skiff, she saw the damage was severe. Water was already sloshing over their boots. They were taking on water fast, and Kael was in no condition to bail. The sea had drawn its first blood, using torn strips of her cloak to fashion a makeshift sling for the lens and a bandage for Kael. She managed to steer their listing craft, out of the Strait's worst fury. They limped into a hidden inlet as dawn bled gray light across the sky, and that is when she saw it, a sleek, official galley cruising far out on the calmer waters, its sails marked with the unmistakable sigil of the High Warden. Their time had just run out. The galley's silhouette was a black cutout against the morning sun, its patrol path a slow, deliberate sweep of the coast. Elara wrenched the tiller, steering their wounded skiff toward a dark fissure in the cliff face, a maw of jagged rock that swallowed them into sudden, echoing darkness. The sea caves were a labyrinth of dripping stone, their only light the faint, persistent glow from the tidal lens. For hours, they listened to the rhythmic slap of water against the hull and the distant, haunting call of a horn from the hunter's galley, a sound that seemed to seep into the rock around them. With their fresh water nearly gone and Kael's shoulders swollen and taut with pain, their hiding place felt less like a refuge and more like a tomb. Desperation forced a grim experiment. Cradling the heavy crystal, Elara lowered it into a pool of seawater that had collected in a hollow of the cave floor. The effect was instantaneous. The lens flared, and above the water, an intricate web of light coalesced into a three-dimensional map of staggering detail. Here were the lost coastlines of Enminor, not as flat lines on parchment, but as shimmering topographies of submerged cities and sunken river valleys. It was a ghost continent, rendered in light and water, a vision so beautiful it hurt. "We are running out of everything," Kael muttered, his voice thin with pain and frustration. "This map is a wonder, but we cannot eat light, Elara. We are going to die down here for a legend." His words hung in the damp air, sharp and true. The quest was tearing them apart. Elara watched the holographic shores flicker, her resolve hardening into something cold and pragmatic. "We are not dying here," she stated, her voice cutting through his despair. "We head for the fishing village of Telos. It is neutral ground, outside the harbor guard's usual jurisdiction. We get supplies, we get you proper medical attention, and then we finish this." It was a tremendous risk, trading the safety of shadows for a place full of watching eyes, but staying meant a slow surrender. When a sudden squall swept in from the open sea, cloaking the world in a shroud of wind and stinging rain, she saw their chance. They slipped from the cave mouth, the storm their only ally, and made for the distant, flickering lights of the village, a promise of survival that felt as dangerous as the deep water they had just escaped. The storm's fury had masked their arrival, but the village of Driftwood offered no such cover. Its single, muddy street was a gauntlet of watching eyes under the dripping eaves of salt-bleached shacks. Every conversation felt too loud. Every glance from a stranger held a potential accusation. Elara guided a pale and sweating Kael toward the only source of hope, a ramshackle shipwright's shed at the far end of the pier, its open front revealing the skeletal hull of a fishing boat. The old man within moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who understood the sea's every mood. He said nothing as they approached, his gaze lingering on Kael's makeshift sling and the strange cloth-wrapped bundle Elara carried so carefully. "We need supplies," she said, her voice low, and information. She placed her last piece of her old life on his workbench, a silver navigator's compass, gifted to her by the very elders she now defied. Its polished face caught the gray light, the needle trembling toward the north. The shipwright's callous finger tapped the glass, a fine tool for finding your way, he murmured. But some paths are better left uncharted. The High Warden's men were here not 2 days past, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. They are not seeking to bury the past. They seek to dig it up, to wield it. They speak of a power sleeping beneath the lost shores, a force that could command the very tides. He looked at Elara, his eyes old and weary. You are not the first to chase a ghost, but you may be the first who does not wish to become a tyrant with it. The truth landed like a physical blow. This was not a scholarly pursuit anymore, a simple act of proving the elders wrong. Their entire quest was recontextualized in a single, horrifying moment. They were not just rediscovering history. They were racing a man who wanted to turn a legend into a weapon. The moral weight of the tidal lens in her pack felt immense, a responsibility she had never asked for. Every choice now carried the potential for catastrophe, far beyond her own exile. Trust was a currency more scarce than silver in that moment, but they had none of the latter left. We only seek to understand what was lost, Elara said, choosing her words with the care of someone crossing thin ice. We need to find a place of knowledge, not power. The old shipwright studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly, pocketing the compass. He gestured toward the churning horizon. There is a place the sea keeps its deepest secrets, the Sunken library. The scholars of Enminor built it in a cavern where air and salt water meet, a vault to preserve their history from the very pride that drowned their shores. He leaned closer, his breath a mist in the damp air. It is said the entrance reveals itself only when the twin moons are full, and their light falls upon the water in a perfect silver road. That is 2 nights from now, at the Cove of the Weeping Stone. Go there, wait for the light. His directions were a lifeline, a thread of hope in a world that was closing in. As they slipped back into the mist, supplies now weighing down their packs, Elara felt the mission transform within her. It was no longer a question of if the lost shores were real, but of who would control the terrible truth of why they were lost. The full moons carved a path of liquid silver across the black water, a bridge of light leading directly to the base of the Weeping Stone. Elara held the tidal lens aloft, its crystal heart drinking in the twin lights. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the sea began to sigh. The water directly below the moon's path did not boil or vanish, but simply pulled back, folding away from a hidden entrance like a curtain being drawn aside. Revealed was a grand archway of green-tinged stone, its surface carved with spirals that seemed to swim in the faint light, the entrance to the Sunken library. The air that rushed out was ancient and dry, carrying the scent of dust and deep time. They scrambled down the slick rocks as the displaced water churned and towered on either side of the revealed path, a temporary canyon leading into the heart of the legend. Kael stumbled, his face pale with pain, and Elara had to half carry him across the threshold. The moment they were inside, a deep groan echoed through the cavern, and the wall of water began to shudder, threatening to crash back into place. The library was a single, immense chamber, its curved walls lined not with shelves of paper, but with vast murals painted in luminous algae and tablets of polished obsidian. There was no time to marvel. The air pocket was collapsing, the ceiling weeping steadily as the sea asserted its dominion. In the flickering light of a glow stone, the story of Enminor's fall unfolded before them. The murals showed not a natural catastrophe, but a betrayal. The rulers of Enminor, in their pride, had attempted a ritual to bind the sea itself, to command the tides and expand their shores. But the ocean was not a force to be enslaved. In a final, desperate act of defiance, a forgotten order of star singers had shattered the ritual, causing the sea to eternally reject the land, swallowing the continent in a great act of self-preservation. The final mural showed a vast, formless shape, woven from waves and storm, the sentient guardian born from that rejection, a protector ensuring the lost shores would never again be defiled by arrogant hands. Kael slumped against a tablet, his breathing shallow. "We need to go," he gasped, as a large chunk of the ceiling gave way, crashing into a pool that was rapidly expanding. Elara's eyes fell on a central obsidian slab, its text describing the Guardian's nature. It was too heavy to move. With a final, agonizing look at the priceless original, she took a piece of charcoal and a scrap of treated leather from her pack and began frantically rubbing, copying the crucial text. It was a choice between preserving knowledge and preserving their lives. As the water swirled around their ankles, she finished, clutching the fragile copy to her chest. They fought their way back through the rising flood, the roar of the returning sea deafening in the tunnel. Gasping on the surface, drenched and shivering, the weight of what they had learned was heavier than any tablet. The copied text was clear. The Guardian awakens not by the sight of a ship, but by the hubris in a mortal heart. The phrase echoed in Elara's mind, a cold dread settling in her soul. Their quest was no longer a search for a place. It had become a test of their own intentions, and the ocean itself was the judge. Their hidden camp was a scene of brutal violation. Their meager supplies were scattered and crushed, the canvas of their shelter slashed to ribbons. The message of their discovery was not left to implication. Tied to the broken central pole was a small, sleek hawk, a messenger breed used only by the exiles in the high cliffs. The note from Orin was terse, scrawled on a torn piece of hide. "The Warden knows your faces, his fleet weighs anchor. They were no longer just explorers, they were prey. Every safe port, every friendly cove was now a potential trap." The world had shrunk to the unforgiving line where rock met sea, a landscape of hiding places and sudden exposure. Kael leaned heavily against a shattered crate, his face ashen. "We cannot outrun galleys, Elara, not like this." He gestured to his injured shoulder, a stark reminder of their fragility. The fear in his eyes was a palpable force, threatening to extinguish the last embers of their resolve. It was Elara who voiced the terrible, necessary solution. "We split up. You follow the high river canyon. It is too shallow for their boats, and you can lose any trackers on land. I will take the coast. I will draw their eyes." The words felt like a betrayal, a severing of the only trust she had left. But it was a strategic sacrifice, a desperate move in a game where the Warden held all the other pieces. They parted with a silence heavier than any farewell. Elara watched Kael disappear into the thick inland fog, a solitary figure swallowed by the wilderness. Then she turned to face the sea, utterly alone. The weight of the tidal lens in her pack was a constant reminder of the clock ticking down. Unwrapping the crystal, she held it over a tide pool. The holographic map shimmered to life, but now it showed something new, a delicate tracery of safe channels weaving through a labyrinth of fog-bound islets that guarded the approach to the alignment point. It was a path no conventional chart could ever record, a route visible only to one who held the key. The fog was a thick, gray wool, muffling sound and limiting sight to a few desperate feet. Guided by the lent's glowing pathways, she navigated a treacherous maze of half-submerged rocks and sudden drop-offs. The distant, periodic blast of a horn from the Warden's fleet echoed through the mist, a sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. Each note tightened the knot of fear in her stomach. She was a mouse moving through a field of sleeping cats, her entire world reduced to the next safe turn, the next hidden cove. The celestial event was mere hours away, a convergence of cosmic clockwork that would not wait for her fear or her fatigue, success or failure, discovery or a watery grave. All now rested on her ability to follow a ghost map through a blind world, racing against an enemy who wanted not just to stop her, but to claim her discovery for a purpose that would drown the world in tyranny all over again. The fog parted without warning, revealing a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. It was not open sea before her, but a graveyard of legend. The ghost fleet rested in a bay of impossibly still, glass-clear water, a dozen Enminorian ships, standing silent and whole. Their sails, woven from some enchanted cloth, hung limp yet untouched by rot. Their hulls, carved with spirals like those in the library, gleamed as if they had set sail only yesterday. Time held no dominion here. The air was thick and silent, a sacred hush broken only by the distant, intermittent calls of the Warden's horns, a reminder that the present world was closing in on this pocket of the past. Her small boat glided between the colossal vessels, each one a monument to a civilization that had tried to command the ocean and had been answered with oblivion. She chose the largest ship, its deck sloping gently toward her. Climbing aboard felt like a desecration. In the captain's quarters, she found him, a skeleton still seated at his chart table, one bony hand resting on a leather-bound logbook. The final entry was a confession, written in a frantic hand. It spoke not of a storm, but of a ritual of atonement. The incantation was a plea, a song of humility and sacrifice offered to the sea to spare the few who had turned from their leader's pride. It was the key to appeasing the Guardian, a verbal key that required not power, but surrender. The sounds of the search grew louder, the shouts of men now distinct in the muffled air. There was no time to copy the words. Elara committed the ritual to memory, repeating the strange, melodic phrases under her breath until they were etched into her mind as deeply as the star symbol on her shard. Then, with a reverence that felt like a funeral rite, she weighted the logbook with a piece of rusted iron from the desk and dropped it over the side. It sank slowly, the ancient leather swallowing the light, taking the original secret into the seas, keeping forever. In that moment, she was no longer just a seeker of truth. She had become its sole guardian, a living vessel for a knowledge that could either restore balance or be twisted into a world-drowning weapon. The fate of the pact now rested entirely on her shoulders. Then the wind shifted. A great exhalation swept in from the open ocean, tearing the veil of fog to tatters. For one horrifying second, the world was clear. And there, cutting through the silver water, was the Warden's flagship, its prow aimed directly at the becalmed bay, and the lone figure standing on the deck of a ghost. The Warden's flagship was a predator of wood and sail, its oars beating the water into a froth as it closed the distance. Elara felt the tidal lens grow warm in her hands, as if it sensed the approaching corruption of its purpose. There was no path left to run, no fog left to hide in. Only one desperate, destructive option remained. She did not hold the crystal up to chart a course, but plunged it deep into the salt water, focusing every ounce of her will, not on asking, but on demanding. The sea answered with a groan that vibrated through the hull of the ghost ship. The placid water around the Warden's vessel began to spin, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed. A great vortex opened, a churning mouth that grabbed the flagship's hull and refused to let go. The sound of splintering timber was a symphony of ruin. But the strain was too much for the ancient artifact. A web of cracks appeared across the lens's surface, and with a sound like a dying chime, it shattered in her hands. The light within it flared once, a final, brilliant pulse, and then vanished forever, its energy dissipating into the whirlpool it had created. The loss was a physical ache, the destruction of a key to a lost world. Yet as she watched the Warden's ship list violently, its mast snapping like a twig, she knew the sacrifice was necessary. The mission, the truth, was more important than any single relic. With the lens gone, there were no second chances, no opportunities to turn back. The alignment would happen only once. She used the chaotic backwash of the dying whirlpool to propel her small boat away from the wreckage, her heart a hollow echo of the crystal's final chime. And then, against the backdrop of the foundering galley, she saw it, a small, patched sail, cutting a nimble path through the churning water. It was Kael, his face set in a grimace of pain and determination, guiding his craft directly toward her. Against all odds and every rule of survival, he had found her. The sea-blasted rock was a desolate altar at the world's end. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counter-rhythm to the patient alignment of stars overhead. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom, and Kael emerged, his face gaunt, but his eyes burning with a fierce resolve. Their hands clasped, a wordless confirmation of survival that was instantly undercut by the sight on the horizon. The Warden's remaining galleys were reforming, a line of dark teeth against the twilight, methodically closing the distance to this final, exposed point. The ocean itself was unnervingly placid, a flat, dark pane of glass that gave no hint of the continent it had swallowed. There was no more time for fear, only for action. "We do this together," Elara said, her voice steady. She recited the first phrase of the ritual she had memorized, the ancient words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. Kael's voice joined hers, weaker but just as determined, their words weaving together into a single thread of sound cast out over the silent water. It was not a song of command, but one of humility, an acknowledgement of a power far greater than their own. As the final star clicked into its celestial position, the air grew thick and charged. The dark sea before them did not part. Instead, it began to breathe. A luminous mist rose from the water's surface, a soft, living light that shimmered with the colors of a balone and moonstone. It was not the angry churn of the whirlpool, but something far more profound and ancient, the veil over a slumbering truth beginning to stir. The luminous mist coalesced into a towering form of living water and captured starlight, a being whose presence was not a sound, but a pressure in their minds. The Sea Guardian regarded them, and its test began not with questions, but by pouring their own fears and desires back into them. Elara was plunged into a vision, so vivid it stole her breath. She saw the High Warden standing on a resurrected Enminor, but the golden shores were gray and barren. The white towers were fortified into grim battlements. The land's innate magic was being siphoned, twisted into a force that chained the very tides, turning the ocean into a weapon for a fleet of conquest that darkened the horizon. The vision was a cold, brutal clarity. This was the future they were trying to prevent, the ultimate consequence of the hubris the ancient texts had warned against. The conflict was no longer against soldiers or ships, but against the potential for that same arrogance to exist within her own heart. Could she truly claim her quest was for knowledge alone, and not for the glory of being the one to prove the elders wrong? The Guardian's gaze was a mirror, and it demanded absolute honesty. There were no words to argue, no maps to consult, only the raw, exposed truth of their intentions. Kael stood rigid beside her, his own internal battle written on his face, a struggle between the scholar's thirst for revelation and the man's understanding of the cost. Elara made her decision. She opened her hands in a gesture of utter surrender, offering up the memory of every sacrifice. She offered the terror in the Forbidden Cove, the shattering of the tidal lens, the painful choice to send Kael away, and the fragile, desperate hope that had carried her this far. She asked for nothing, not a glimpse of the lost cities, not a relic to prove her tale, not even forgiveness for their intrusion. She asked only that the shores remain as they were, a secret kept by the sea, a testament to a lesson that must never be forgotten. The fate of a continent, and perhaps the balance of the world itself, hung on the purity of that single, selfless wish. The pressure in the air shifted. The Guardian's immense form, which had felt like a coming storm, softened. A profound sense of acceptance, warm and vast as the ocean itself, washed over them. The being of water and light did not vanish but gently unraveled, its essence returning to the mist from which it came. The luminous haze then parted, not like a curtain, but like a slow, deliberate exhale. And there, beneath the perfect alignment of the stars, lay the lost shores of Enmenor. It was not a ruin, but a vision of breathtaking, serene beauty. Golden beaches sloped into calm, turquoise waters, and beyond them, the white towers of the ancient cities gleamed in the starlight, untouched by time, waiting in a peace that was both a gift and a solemn trust. The sand was like warm, powdered gold beneath their feet. They stepped onto the shore of Enmenor, and the air itself tasted of blooming jasmine and salt, a perfume preserved for 1,000 years. Fountains played in silent courtyards, their water cascading in perfect, crystalline arcs. Trees heavy with unfamiliar fruit stood unmoving, not a single leaf daring to fall. The entire continent was suspended in the heartbeat before its downfall, a museum of a life interrupted. The silence was not empty, but profound, a held breath waiting for an exhale that never came. Elara felt the weight of every soul who had lived and breathed here, a pressure of history so immense it was difficult to walk. Kael simply stared, his scholar's mind overwhelmed by the sheer, impossible reality of it. They were pilgrims in a cathedral built by time and tragedy, and the urge to touch, to take a single blossom as proof, was a physical ache in their hands. But they had made a pact with the sea, and to break it would be a sacrilege worse than the Warden's ambition. "We take only what we came for," Kael whispered, his voice swallowed by the immense quiet. The truth, not a stone, not a relic, just the memory of this. The peace of the place was so absolute, so fragile, that the thought of the Warden's boots crushing this grass felt like a violation of a universal law. It made their mission feel sacred, transforming them from discoverers into guardians. Then a sharp, metallic screech tore through the sacred silence. From the cliffs flanking the hidden bay, iron grappling hooks arced through the air, their ropes coiling like venomous snakes. They bit deep into the ancient, immaculate stone. The Warden had not waited for the sea to grant him passage. He had clawed his way over the bones of the world to claim his prize. Boots of polished iron crunched on the pearlescent sand, a sound of brutal finality. The High Warden and his elite guard did not pause to marvel at the ageless city or the silent fountains. Their eyes, hardened by ambition, were locked on a single structure that rose from the continent's center, a slender, crystalline spire that pulsed with a soft inner light, the heart of Enminor. This was not a search for knowledge, it was a targeted extraction, a surgical strike aimed at the very soul of the lost land. Elara's breath caught. They were not just trespassers. They were surgeons coming for the heart, and they knew exactly where to cut. The confrontation was now unavoidable, a physical clash on a landscape that had known only peace for 1,000 years. She and Kael were no longer explorers. In that moment, they became the only line of defense. Outnumbered and outmatched, a direct fight was suicide, but Elara possessed something the Warden did not, the memory of a map. She met Kael's eyes, a silent message passing between them. Then she broke from cover, her movement a deliberate flicker in the periphery of the guards. She did not run from them. She ran in a way that made them notice, a calculated dash toward a different, less prominent path that snaked away from the central spire. She was a decoy, a lure. Her plan was a dangerous gamble, to use the Warden's own single-minded greed against him. She would lead him on a false trail, toward a dead-end canyon she remembered from the tidal lens projection, a place where the geography itself could trap them and buy precious minutes. Every second she could draw his attention was a second Kael could use. As she ran, she risked a glance back and saw the Warden bark an order, splitting his force. The main body, with him at its head, broke into a run after her. It was working, but as they turned to pursue, she lifted a hand, a subtle signal only her cousin would understand. While she became the rabbit, Kael became the shadow. He did not follow her. He slipped away, moving with a pained but determined grace through the pristine plazas, his own path taking him on a direct, desperate course toward the glowing spire. His plan was different, born not of cartography, but of a scholar's understanding of systems. If he could not fight the Warden's soldiers, perhaps he could understand the heart's mechanisms and find a way to lock it away forever. The race was now split in two, a frantic chase across a paradise, with the ultimate power of a sunken civilization hanging in the balance. The crystal spire thrummed under Kael's palm, a vibration that resonated deep in his bones. He had reached the heart of Enminor, but the ancient texts he now recalled spoke of a terrible price. The ritual of sealing was not a simple incantation. It was a transaction, a life for a land, to become the anchor that would ensure the shores remained forever lost to the world. A soul must willingly bind itself to the heart, becoming the new, mortal guardian for all time. It was a fate of eternal solitude, a consciousness woven into the very winds and waters of this silent paradise. The warden's shouts echoed closer. Elara's diversion was failing. He could flee, hide, and try to live with the knowledge that this beauty would be defiled, its power harnessed for conquest, or he could make this place his tomb, gifting it the peace it had known for a millennium. The choice was agonizingly clear. He thought of Elara's unwavering courage, of the map she had trusted, of the world that could not be trusted with such power. A profound calm settled over him, washing away the pain in his shoulder and the last vestiges of fear. He placed both hands upon the warm crystal, closed his eyes, and poured his will into the stone, offering his life force not as a demand, but as a gift. The heart responded with a blinding flash of pure, white light. A wave of concussive force erupted from the spire, silent and immense. It struck the advancing guards, throwing them back like scattered leaves. Across the plaza, Elara felt the energy pulse through the air, a sudden, silent detonation that made her stumble and turn, her heart lurching with a terrible, hopeful dread. The plaza was a silent stage for the final act. Elara arrived, her lungs burning, just as the last of Kael's forms solidified. His face was turned toward her, captured not in a grimace of pain, but with a small, serene smile, his hand resting eternally on the glowing heart. He was no longer her cousin, but a statue of living stone, a permanent sentinel for the land he had saved. The grief that slammed into her was a physical force, so immense it threatened to buckle her knees. There was no time to scream, no moment to touch his petrified form. The very ground beneath her feet shuddered violently, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air as the connection to Enminor began to fray. The golden light of the shores flickered, the edges of the world starting to blur and dissolve like a painting left in the rain. Her heart tore in two. One half screamed to stay, to fall beside him and let the beautiful prison claim her too. The other half, the part that had carried the map and defied the elders, understood with cold, brutal clarity that his sacrifice would be rendered meaningless if she died here. His heroism demanded a witness. The truth of this place, the reality of his choice, needed a voice in the outside world. Survival was no longer a personal desire. It was her final duty to him. With a sob that was wrenched from the deepest part of her soul, she turned her back on the only family she had left. She ran, not in panic, but in a desperate, focused sprint toward the fading boundary. The world dissolved around her, the scent of jasmine replaced by the sharp salt of the sea mist. The beautiful towers and silent fountains melted into streaks of light, pulling her backward through the collapsing gateway. The last thing she saw was Kael's stone silhouette, a solitary guardian against the dying glow, before the vision snapped shut and the lost shores of Enminor vanished once more into the realm of beautiful, painful memory, leaving her alone in the sudden, crushing dark. The waves that had rejected a continent now gently cradled her broken body, depositing her on the familiar sand of her home coast like a piece of driftwood. Consciousness returned as a slow, painful tide, each memory of the lost shores a fresh wave of grief. She was alive, but the part of her that had dared to hope had been left behind, petrified alongside her cousin. A shadow fell over her, and the old shipwright from Driftwood was there, his weathered face grim as he knelt beside her. He said nothing, simply wrapping a coarse blanket around her trembling shoulders. He had been watching the strange tides, he murmured, waiting for the sea to give something back. He helped her to his hidden shack above the tide line, a place of tar and timber that smelled of salt and solitude. The external battle was won, but a new, quieter war had begun within her. How do you live in a world that feels like a pale imitation of the truth you have witnessed? How do you walk among people who debate myths when you have walked the myth itself and felt its cost? The weight of her knowledge was a continent sinking in her own soul. She knew she could never speak of Kael's true fate or the living beauty of Enmenor. To do so would invite new hunters, new wardens, and betray the very sacrifice that had saved it all. So she crafted a story for the old man, a tale of a storm and a shipwreck, of a brave cousin lost to the sea while they searched for a fabled current. It was a story built on half-truths, just enough to explain her grief and her sudden, profound solitude, and to secure his silent, understanding help. He asked no difficult questions, simply offering her a corner of his workshop and a place in his quiet world. In the weeks that followed, the official word spread through the harbors. The High Warden and his entire fleet had been lost in a sudden, inexplicable squall, a tragic mystery. The elders declared a day of mourning. Elara heard the news with a hollow calm. She alone knew it was not a storm that had taken them, but the ocean's own justice, the final act of a guardian ensuring its secret would remain kept. The world had moved on, neatly tying the legend back into a safe, tragic tale, and Elara was left, the sole keeper of a beautiful, terrible truth, tasked with the lonely work of building a new life upon the shores of a lie. The familiar weight of charcoal in her hand felt like a homecoming. In the quiet sanctuary of the shipwright's shed, surrounded by the scent of pine tar and old paper, Elara began to draw. Her lines were not the hesitant scratches of a student, but the confident, flowing strokes of someone who had seen the true shape of the world. She charted every hidden reef, every safe cove, and every treacherous current, with a precision that made the old shipwright nod in silent approval. This new map was a testament to her journey, a guide to protect others. But in the vast western expanse, where every other cartographer drew speculative islands and sea monsters, she left only a profound and deliberate emptiness. She labeled the void with elegant, simple script, the Guardian Sea. It was not a challenge, but a warning. It was Kael's monument. This single, beautiful blank space became the map's defining feature, a siren call to every scholar and explorer who saw it. They would come to her, their eyes alight with curiosity, pointing to the void and asking what lay there. She became an expert at deflection, her answers a masterclass in quiet misdirection. The waters are unnavigable, she would say. The currents are treacherous and the fog never lifts. It is a place where compasses fail and the stars themselves seem to lie. She spoke with such calm authority, her reputation for accuracy on all other points so impeccable that most accepted her judgment. She used her maps renowned not for glory, but as a tool, subtly steering maritime traffic away from the sacred waters, making the world a little safer for the secret it cradled. Her life became a paradox of visibility and concealment. She was celebrated for the clarity of her work, yet her greatest truth was the emptiness at its heart. Every compliment on her map's precision was a reminder of the lie she protected. Every curious glance at the guardian sea was a potential threat she had to gently, firmly turn away. The personal stake was no longer her life, but her legacy. She had to ensure the truth of Enminor and Kael's sacrifice died with her, that her maps would guide and protect for generations without ever revealing the beautiful, tragic reason for their one great silence. Years turned the young cartographer into a respected, solitary figure. Her hair gained streaks of gray, and her hands, though still steady, bore the lines of a long and purposeful life. Her map hung in navigation schools and captain's quarters, its blank space a permanent question mark on the world, and as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, she would walk the familiar shore, her gaze forever fixed on the western waves. She was the guardian of the memory, a living anchor to a truth the sea would never surrender, watching over the horizon where a world of peace and a brother of stone slept forever beneath the silent stars. The sea salt had long ago etched its own map across her face. Elara's quiet existence was measured by the tides and the steady rhythm of her own breath. A life built around a silence she had come to wear like a second skin. The knock on her door was a foreign sound, an intrusion from a world she had carefully held at a distance. The young woman who stood there held no official sigil, no declaration from the elders. Her name was Lyra, and her eyes held not ambition, but a burning, earnest curiosity. In her hands, she cradled a water-stained journal, its cover familiar enough to make Elara's heart clench. It was one of Kael's early field books, filled with his dense, coded script and sketches of coastal flora. I have been studying the old growth patterns on the sea cliffs, Lyra began, her voice respectful but unwavering. And the symbols in this journal, they match carvings only found in places the sea has reclaimed. I do not seek to dredge up what should rest. I only wish to understand the story. She was a mirror, a reflection of a younger Elara standing in a forbidden cove, her hands brushing away kelp to find a truth. The conflict was an old, familiar ache, resurfacing with the force of a storm tide. Her promise to the past, the sacred trust of Kael's sacrifice, warred with a desire she thought she had buried, the need for his story to be known, for his quiet heroism to mean something more than a secret carried to her grave. Lyra was not the warden. Her heart held no greed, only a scholar's thirst. To send her away with nothing felt like a betrayal of the very truth she had sworn to protect. So Elara did not give her coordinates or reveal the nature of the heart. She gave her a story. She invited Lyra to sit by the fire, and in the flickering light, she wove a tale of a proud civilization and the sentient sea that loved its shores so deeply it could not bear to see them defiled. She spoke of a brave guardian who, in a final act of selfless love, chose to become one with that sea, a permanent stone sentinel, so that the beauty of that lost world would never be threatened again. It was the truth, every word of it, but clothed in the gentle fabric of myth, a legend of sacrifice and a love stronger than any king's command. Lyra listened, her eyes wide, and when the story was done, she did not ask for proof or a heading. She simply nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You have given me more than I came for," she whispered. "Thank you for the story. It is a better compass than any map." After the young naturalist had gone, carrying the legend out into the world, Elara walked to the shore. The evening was perfectly still, the waves lapping at the sand with a soft, rhythmic hush. And for the first time in decades, she felt a strange, warm calm settle over the water, as if the sea itself was finally, peacefully at rest. The sea breeze on the cliff was softer that day, a gentle hand on her weathered cheek. Elara sat on her favorite perch, the worn stone fitting the shape of her life as if she had grown from it. For decades, the horizon had been a wall separating her from her greatest grief and her most sacred trust. But today, it felt like an open door. The ache of loneliness, a constant companion since her return, had finally stilled. She watched the endless rhythm of the waves, the push and pull that had swallowed a continent and given her a purpose, and for the first time, she understood her own place in that vast, ancient cycle. Her life had not been a tragedy interrupted by a single, heroic act. It was a single, continuous act of love, a quiet vigil that was as much a part of the balance as the sea's rejection of the shore. Kael had given his life in a moment of ultimate sacrifice, and she had given hers in the long, patient years that followed. They were two different notes in the same eternal song. This was the peace she had never dared to hope for, a harmony that resolved all the old, internal conflicts of regret. From a fold in her cloak, she drew a sheet of heavy, water-resistant parchment and a small vial of ink. With a hand that did not tremble, she began to write. This was not a map or a carefully crafted myth. It was the full, unvarnished truth, every detail of the glowing shard, the sunken library, the ghost fleet, and the terrible, beautiful moment Kael became one with the heart of Enminor. She wrote of his smile, the last thing she saw before the world dissolved. She sealed the letter with wax, imprinting it with the 7-pointed star from a memory, and held it in her lap. This was her final decision, the ultimate release. She would not bury this truth with her. She would give it back to the only keeper she truly trusted. With a slow, deliberate motion, she cast the sealed letter into the air. It spun once, a white flutter against the deep blue, before the wind caught it and carried it down to the waiting water. It bobbed for a moment, a tiny, defiant boat on the vast expanse, and then a wave gently curled over it, accepting the offering. The burden she had carried for a lifetime was gone, entrusted to fate and the deep. The story would now sleep with the lost shores, to be found only when the world had grown wise enough to hear it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet, she closed her eyes. The sound of the waves was no longer a roar or a sigh, but a clear, whispered word carried on the salt-scented air, a name she had not heard spoken aloud in decades. Kael, the true monument to Elara's journey, was never carved from stone. It lives instead in the vast, silent emptiness on the western edge of every map, a deliberate void that invites wonder instead of conquest. Her legacy became the enduring mystery of the Guardian's Sea itself, a whispered story passed between sailors and scholars about the shores the ocean chose to keep. She spent a lifetime transforming from a young woman who sought to uncover a fact into a guardian who understood that wisdom lies not in possession, but in protection. Some truths are not meant to be owned or displayed. They are living things, fragile and profound, whose greatest value is realized only when they are shielded from the glare of the world, allowed to rest in their own sacred peace. The sea, in its infinite wisdom, became the ultimate keeper of this pact. By holding the lost continent of Enmenor in its eternal embrace, it honors the profound sacrifice made on its golden sands, a sacrifice born not of pride, but of pure, selfless love. That final, silent exchange between a mortal heart and the soul of the ocean forever altered the balance between land and water, weaving a lesson of humility into the very fabric of the world. It leaves us with a legend to ponder, a quiet question that echoes in the crash of every wave. What would we be willing to give up, not to conquer a truth, but to let it live on, beautiful and free, for eternity?